The Cold War was probably the most fascinating time for military aviation. The West and the Soviet Union were desperate to know what the other side was doing, and thus they also tried hard to outdo the other when it came to aircraft development. The early period of the Cold War, though, was perhaps the most intriguing part, as jet aircraft went through rapid phases of development, and the two sides tried to get as big of an advantage as possible over the other. One of these aircraft accidentally started a bit of an arms race between the Soviet Union and the United States. This was after the United States saw footage of a large number of these aircraft flying together. That aircraft was the Myasishchev M-4. The M-4 would become one of the earliest Soviet strategic bombers to be jet-powered, along with the Tupolev Tu-16 Badger. The M-4, as we shall explore, was an aircraft that never really lived up to its design promise. But that didn't stop it from forcing the United States to build up a strategic bomber fleet of its own. Development of the M-4. The Myasishchev M-4 was developed to a Soviet Navy requirement for a jet-powered, long-range maritime reconnaissance platform with a secondary strategic bombing role capable of reaching targets within North American territories. By the end of its service life, the metal-skinned aircraft would see extended service as a dedicated in-flight refueler and missile carrier platform. Two prototypes were eventually realized before some 91 production aircraft followed. Since retired by the mid-1990s, the M-4 certainly gave Western observers great pause during the tumultuous years of the Cold War, with overstated capabilities being reported as in so many other secretive Soviet-originated systems. However, unlike other Soviet products of the period, the M-4 series was never exported beyond its home borders to allies or satellite states, and none were ever utilized in combat actions. Work began on developing the M-4 not long after the end of the Second World War. The Soviet Union decided to focus on development of a long-range strategic bomber that had the capability of delivering atomic weapons. At the time, it had a fleet of Tupolev Tu-4s, which were nothing more than reverse-engineered Boeing B-29 Superfortress bombers. The Tu-4 was quickly becoming outclassed. It didn't have the range to strike at the heart of America, and the Korean War had shown piston-engine bombers were extremely vulnerable to jet fighter interception. Thus, a new aircraft was badly needed. It was the Myasishchev Aircraft Company that was then tasked with producing a new strategic bomber with nuclear capabilities for the Soviet Union. Quite conventional in its design, the M-4 would first take flight on January 20, 1953, and would soon start its state acceptance trials, which began in March 1954. The aircraft would earn the NATO reporting name Bison, and it would enter service with the Soviet Air Force in 1955, and the Myasishchev Company would go on to build 34 examples of the bomber, which included the initial two prototypes. The Soviet Union now had a long-range strategic bomber. Shocking the United States. The Bison was first shown off to the world in Red Square on May Day, 1954. And it surprised the United States, who had no idea that the Soviet Union had a jet bomber. But the USA soon found out that the Bison didn't have the range to attack the USA, much like the Tu-4. So the Myasishchev Company came up with the 3M, or the Bison-b in the West, which was more powerful and had more range, and this new model first flew in 1955. However, the United States got worried again when they saw 28 Bisons fly at a Soviet air show. This set alarm bells off that the Bison was in mass production, with the United States not knowing that one group of 10 aircraft flew past the cameras twice to bolster the numbers of the jet. This led to the Americans fearing a bomber gap, and thus Boeing was suddenly tasked with mass-producing the B-47 Stratojet and the newer and more capable B-52 Stratofortress to fill the gap and gain the advantage back over the Soviet Union. The reality was, though, that the Soviet Union didn't have that many aircraft, and the Bison wasn't performing as expected. The design and its issues. The M-4 was crewed by 8 personnel made up of pilots, mission specialists and gunners. Dimensionally, it sported a running length of nearly 155 feet with a wingspan of 165 feet, 7 inches. When at rest, the M4 stood at 46 feet, 3 inches atop its centerline retractable undercarriage, the drooping wingtip supported by smaller wheeled legs. The design encompassed a sharply pointed nose cone assembly to which the flight deck was fitted just ahead of the shoulder-mounted wings. The wing roots contained the 4X Mikulin AM3A turbojet engines, aspirated along the wing leading edge and exhausting through the trailing edge. The wings themselves were well swept in accordance to the growing aerodynamic direction encountered throughout the 1950s. The fuselage then trailed into a tapered, raised empennage to which a single, high-reaching vertical tail fin was affixed. This mounted a pair of horizontal tailplanes designed to clear the exhaust of the 4-engine wing setup. The 4-engine configuration allowed for a top speed of 588 miles per hour to be reached. Range was 5,000 miles with a near 3,500 combat radius. The M4 exhibited a service ceiling of 36,000 feet. While a bomber by trade, the M4 was defensed through a network of 9x 23mm NR-23 cannons. This arrangement could be replaced by 6x 23mm AM-23 cannons. The cannons were dispersed through dorsal, ventral and tail fuselage barbettes for optimal reaches about the aircraft. The cannon armament was standard and intended solely for defense of the crew and airframe. However, as a strategic bombing platform, the M4 could field up to 53,000 pounds of internal stores, both conventional and nuclear in nature, though a typical load of 19,800 was generally utilized. Later M4 models could make use of Soviet-designed cruise missiles along externally mounted, underwing hardpoints to broaden the tactical reach of the bomber, particularly in the armed patrol role. End of the line for the Bison. The Bison would be primarily used as a long-range maritime reconnaissance and strike aircraft, with most soon converted to tankers in the 1970s and 1980s. The Tupolev Tu-22M would soon take over the maritime missions. Amazingly, tanker versions of the Bison would fly on until 1994. Thanks to post-Cold War arms limitations agreements, most retired Bisons were then broken up for scrap. But there are at least 4 examples of the aircraft that have survived today, with 2 of those in museums. While it might have started an arms race by accident, the United States had no reason to fear the Myasishchev M-4 Bison.